The fortress lay in silence, buried deep within the mountains where no one dared to go. Its walls, once alive with banners and armies, now stood broken and blackened by centuries of storms. The ground trembled whenever the thunder rolled, but inside the ruined halls, something older than the stones themselves was breathing. It was a slow, heavy breath, like fire trying to stay alive in the cold. In the shadows, chained to the pillars of the great chamber, rested a creature so vast and powerful that time itself seemed afraid to touch him. The war dragon was alive, but only barely. His wings were folded against his sides, torn and scarred. His once bright scales had grown dull, cracked by battles fought long before any living human was born. Dust covered his body like a shroud, and iron chains wrapped around his legs and neck, each link thicker than a man's arm. His golden eyes were half closed, glowing faintly in the dark, filled with a sorrow that never left. The dragon had been forgotten. Once, he had burned across the skies as the pride of an empire, his fire turning night into day and fear into ashes. Armies had cheered when he rose, enemies had fled when his shadow fell. But those days were gone, crushed by betrayal. When the empire no longer needed its living weapon, it buried him here, locking him away like a cursed relic. Centuries passed. Soldiers who had once feared his name turned to dust, rulers who had commanded him became nothing more than legends. Yet the dragon endured, chained in the dark, kept alive by some cruel twist of fate. His body was weak, but his mind was awake. He remembered every order, every cry of war, every betrayal. Worst of all, he remembered freedom, the open skies, the wind under his wings, the world spread out below him. Now all he knew was silence, stone, and loneliness that grew heavier with each year. The storm outside grew louder. Wind howled through broken windows, carrying the sound of rain that struck the walls like arrows. The dragon lifted his head slowly, his chains rattling with the weight of ages. He listened. Through the roar of the storm, another sound drifted in. Soft, light, fragile. Footsteps. The dragon's eyes opened wider. His breath rumbled, a sound deeper than thunder. No one had entered this place for decades. The last who came were treasure hunters, and they never left. The mountain kept their bones. So who would walk here now, into a place cursed by whispers and fear? The footsteps grew closer, echoing against the stone. At last, a figure stepped into the great chamber. A small figure, fragile compared to the giant ruins and the beast that waited in the dark. It was a girl, a human girl. Her cloak was wet with rain, her face pale but determined. She carried no torch, only a dim glow stick in her hand, casting a thin circle of light around her. The light fell upon the dragon's scales, and for the first time in centuries, the girl froze at the sight of eyes staring back at her. The dragon did not roar. He did not snap his chains or lunge forward. Instead, he lowered his massive head until his golden eyes shone clearly in the weak glow. Tears glimmered there, though he had not cried in 100 years. The girl gasped, her breath catching in her throat. She had heard stories of monsters, of beasts that swallowed men whole, but she had never imagined sorrow in their eyes. For a long moment, neither moved. The dragon waited, expecting her to run like the others had. He expected fear, screaming, the sound of hurried footsteps retreating into the storm. But the girl stood still. Her heart raced, but her feet did not move. She took a step closer. The iron chains groaned as the dragon shifted, his claws scraping stone. A low growl built in his chest, a warning as old as time. Yet still, the girl did not turn away. The silence between them was heavier than the storm outside. The dragon's mind swirled with confusion. Why would a human come here? Why would she not fear him? Was this another trick, another cruel game? His fire stirred inside him, but it was weak, almost gone. The girl looked up at him with wide eyes, her voice trembling yet steady enough to reach his ears. "I came to help," she whispered. The words fell into the chamber like a spark into dry wood. The dragon's growl faded. His chest rose and fell with a trembling breath. For centuries he had known nothing but chains and silence. Now, a fragile voice had broken the darkness. A voice that did not command, did not fear, did not hate. He did not believe it. He could not. Yet his heart, locked away for so long, stirred like embers touched by wind. Outside, lightning split the sky, filling the chamber with a blinding flash. The girl's small figure stood against the ruins, her shadow falling across the dragon's scarred face. And for the first time in ages, the beast felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The dragon's eyes did not leave the girl. His golden pupils narrowed, glowing like dying suns inside the vast chamber. He had expected screams, fear, or perhaps a foolish attempt to strike him down. Instead, her words lingered in the silence, soft yet sharp enough to pierce through the chains wrapped around his heart. "I came to help." Those words haunted him, because they were the last thing he believed in. Long ago, men had promised him freedom, honor, loyalty. Each promise turned to ash. Now this small human dared to speak the same language of hope. The dragon's chest rumbled, a growl born from centuries of pain. His voice, when it came, was not words but thunder rolling deep inside his lungs. The chamber shook. Dust fell from the broken ceiling. The sound alone could have split the courage of armies, but the girl did not run. She flinched, yes, her knees trembled, her eyes widened, but still she took a single step forward, her glow stick lifting just enough to throw light over the dragon's scarred muzzle. Her heart was pounding. She could feel it echoing in her ears, louder than the storm outside. Every instinct told her to turn, to flee into the night before the beast could crush her with a single breath. Yet something inside her, some stubborn, unexplainable pull, kept her feet moving. She looked at the chains digging into his flesh, the rusted iron biting into scale and bone. And she understood. This was not the monster she had imagined. This was a prisoner. The dragon lowered his head until his snout touched the cracked stones, his eyes watching her every movement. His massive teeth gleamed faintly in the glow, sharp enough to slice her in two without effort. He inhaled, and the wind of his breath nearly knocked her off her feet. The girl steadied herself, swallowed her fear, and stretched out her hand. The distance between them felt endless. Her fingers shook as they reached for the ancient beast. One mistake, one snap of his jaw, and she would vanish into the dark forever. But she did not pull away. She touched him. Her hand pressed gently against a scale as large as her chest. The surface was rough, chipped with scars, cold from years without the sun. The dragon froze. He had been struck by swords, burned by plasma fire, pierced by cannons, but he had not felt the simple warmth of a gentle touch for centuries. His breath caught. His eyes widened, then softened. The girl's voice broke the silence again. "You don't want to hurt me." It was not a question. It was not a plea. It was truth spoken softly, yet it carried through the air with a weight the dragon could not ignore. His growl faded into a heavy sigh, steam curling from his nostrils. The chains clattered as his body relaxed, though his gaze never left her. Still, his mind raged with doubt. How could she stand before him without fear? Did she not understand what he was? Did she not see the blood that stained his past, the cities burned beneath his wings, the countless lives ended by his fire? He had been death itself. He was the Empire's weapon, their war machine, their living terror. And yet here she stood, fragile and small, resting her hand against his scarred face as if he were nothing more than a wounded animal. Lightning split the sky again, throwing the ruined chamber into blinding white for an instant. The girl's shadow danced across the walls, a defiant figure against the colossus she dared to touch. When the thunder rolled after, her words came again, clearer this time, stronger, as though she were gathering courage with every second. "You are not a monster. You were only chained." The dragon shut his eyes. He wished to reject the words, to drown them in his fury, but they pierced deeper than any blade. Memories tore through his mind, marching soldiers, cheering generals, endless battles fought not for his will but for theirs. Then came the silence, the betrayal, the cold of the chains. For so long, he had believed himself forgotten, hated, feared. Now, this fragile voice spoke of something else. Something he did not dare believe in: innocence. The The girl stepped back slightly, her hand falling to her side. Her eyes shimmered in the dim light. She was trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she had just done. She had touched a legend of terror, a creature parents used to frighten children into obedience. She should have been eaten alive for her boldness. Yet she stood breathing, alive, staring into eyes that were no longer just furious but confused. The dragon lowered his gaze to the chains wrapped around his claws. He shifted, testing their strength. The iron groaned, sparks of ancient magic flaring briefly before settling again. He knew he could not break them. He had tried for centuries. His power had withered too much. His fire had grown thin. He looked back at the girl, waiting to see if she would now understand the hopelessness of it all. But she only clenched her fists and spoke with a new edge in her voice. "These chains don't belong on you. I will find a way." The words hit him harder than any weapon. For centuries, no one had spoken for him. No one had cared whether he lived or died. Yet this girl, a stranger, had promised him freedom. A promise so fragile, so foolish, it should have made him laugh. Instead, it made his chest ache with something he had long buried: belief. He exhaled, a long, trembling breath that shook the stones. His tears glimmered faintly in the glow, though he tried to hide them by lowering his head again. The girl saw anyway. She stepped closer, resting her hand once more against his muzzle. "You've waited too long. But you're not alone anymore." In the storm outside, the winds howled and the rain poured harder. But within the dark fortress, something fragile had been born between a war dragon and a human girl, a fragile thread of trust, stretched thin yet unbroken. And though the chains still held him, for the first time in centuries, he felt them weaken, not in iron, but in his heart. The ruins grew colder as the days passed, but the girl always returned. Each evening when the storm rolled in over the mountains, her footsteps echoed through the broken halls, steady and unafraid. She carried little with her, sometimes food, sometimes water, sometimes only her voice. And always, the dragon watched her come. At first, he thought she was a dream, a ghost born from his own longing, but her scent was real, her warmth undeniable. She would sit on a broken stone near his muzzle, her glow stick casting pale light over his scarred face, and she would speak. Sometimes about the world beyond the mountains, sometimes about herself. Her words were small, fragile, but they filled the silence that had been his prison for centuries. At first, the dragon did not answer. He listened, his massive head resting on the stone floor, eyes half closed, letting her voice wash over him. It reminded him of the wind he once rode across endless skies. Gentle. Alive. But soon, the questions came. The girl was not satisfied with silence. "Why are you here?" she asked one night, her voice trembling not from fear but from curiosity. "Who chained you?" The dragon's chest rumbled, a sound that made the stones quiver. His first instinct was to turn away, to bury the truth. His past was fire and blood, what human could bear to hear it? Yet the girl's eyes, wide and unblinking, seemed to pierce through his defenses. And so, slowly, painfully, he began to speak. His voice was deep, like mountains grinding against each other, but beneath it lay sorrow. He told her of the Empire, a power that stretched across the stars, hungry for conquest. He was not born to them, he was captured. Hatched in the wild skies of a distant world, his wings had once carried him freely over oceans and storms. But the Empire saw his kind as tools, not creatures. They bound him with chains of iron and spells of control. They forced him into war. He remembered the first city he burned. The sky was black with smoke, the streets filled with screams. He had tried to resist, but the pain of the chains drove him forward. Fire poured from his mouth, and everything living turned to ash. The generals cheered. His heart broke. The girl listened, her small hands clenched in her lap, tears glimmering in her eyes. But she did not turn away. She did not flinch, even when he spoke of worlds reduced to ruins under his shadow. Instead, she whispered, "It wasn't your choice." Those words silenced him. For centuries, he had carried the weight of guilt, believing himself a monster who deserved the chains. No one had ever told him otherwise. Yet this fragile human looked at him and saw not the terror, but the prisoner. He continued, his voice rough with memory. He told her of the war that ended not with glory but with betrayal. The empire had won, its enemies crushed, its dominion secure. And with victory came no thanks, no freedom. The generals who once praised him now feared him. They whispered of his power, of what might happen if he turned against them. And so, they betrayed him. They lured him into this fortress with promises of release, then struck him with chains forged in fire and sorcery. He fought, oh, he fought until the mountains shook and rivers boiled, but even he could not stand against their cunning. Bound, broken, they left him here to rot. Forgotten. The girl wiped at her eyes, her voice sharp with anger. They used you. They threw you away when they didn't need you anymore. The dragon lowered his head, his massive eyes glimmering in the dim light. Yes. And I believed I would die here, unseen. But you came. His voice trembled, a sound like distant thunder fading over empty plains. The girl reached out again, her hand pressing against the warm scale near his eye. You're not alone anymore, she said. Her voice was small, but in the vast emptiness of the chamber, it carried like a vow. For the first time in centuries, the dragon felt something unfamiliar, relief. He let out a long, trembling sigh, his body sinking into the stone as if a great weight had been lifted. He was not forgiven. He was not free. But for the first time, someone had seen him not as a monster, not as a weapon, but as a soul. Yet outside the fortress, the world was not blind. Strange eyes had begun to watch the mountain. Shadows moved at night where none should be. The empire's reach was long, and though centuries had passed, its fear of him had never truly died. The girl did not know it yet, but others had noticed her journeys. And they did not intend to let a forgotten dragon rise again. Inside, the girl leaned closer, her voice gentle. One day, I'll break these chains. You'll see the sky again. The dragon closed his eyes, letting her words sink into his weary heart. Hope was dangerous. Hope was fragile. But her voice made it real. His chest rumbled softly, not with growl or warning, but with something deeper, trust, barely born, yet alive. The storm outside roared as if to warn them both. And deep in the shadows beyond the ruined halls, unseen figures whispered of the danger to come. The mountain storm raged harder than ever that night, a storm so violent it seemed as if the heavens themselves were trying to tear the old fortress apart. Lightning clawed across the black sky, thunder rolled down through the broken towers, and the ruined halls shook with every strike. In the midst of the chaos, the girl appeared again. Her cloak was torn by wind and soaked with rain, her small hands clutching something heavy. This time, she did not come with only food or words. She came with tools. The dragon's golden eyes widened as he saw the glint of metal in her hands. Rusted cutters, broken saws, even a hammer, all stolen, scavenged, gathered with effort only a desperate heart could give. She dragged them across the stone and dropped them at the foot of his chains. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breath visible in the cold air, but her eyes shone with fire. I can't watch you suffer here anymore, she said, her voice trembling yet firm. I'll break them. I'll set you free. The dragon stared at her in silence. His chains were older than her entire bloodline. They had been forged with steel and spells, bound by fear itself. He had fought against them until his claws bled and his bones cracked, and still they held. How could she, so small, so fragile, believe she could succeed? Yet she knelt by his legs, her hands trembling as she lifted the first tool, and struck at the iron. Sparks jumped into the air, fading quickly into the darkness. The dragon lowered his head, his heart aching. He wanted to tell her it was useless, that she would only tire and bleed. But he could not bring himself to stop her. Every strike of her hammer was not against the chain, it was against his despair. Her effort was louder than any promise. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The storm raged, her arms grew weary, and still she fought. Sweat mixed with rain on her brow, her fingers raw and bleeding from the tool's handles. The iron shuddered with every blow but did not break. She bit her lip, refusing to give in. The dragon's chest rumbled with a sound he had not made in centuries, a soft growl of encouragement, almost like a heartbeat echoing in the chamber. But then, the storm outside shifted. The dragon's ears twitched, his head rising sharply. He heard it, a sound beneath the thunder. Footsteps. Metal grinding. Voices distorted through the howling wind. His golden eyes narrowed as shadows spilled into the ruined hall. Figures entered, cloaked in armor, their weapons glowing faintly in the dark. The girl froze, her hands gripping the tool tighter. The intruder's eyes locked on her first, then shifted to the chained beast behind her. One raised a device, its red light blinking like a warning. The dragon's body stiffened. He knew them. They were not men of mercy. They were watchers, sent to guard the secret the Empire had buried. And now they had returned to finish what was left. The leader's voice cut through the chamber. "Step away from it, girl. That creature is forbidden." The girl shook her head, fear flashing in her eyes but courage rooting her to the ground. "He's not a creature. He's alive. He's suffering." The armored figure lifted his weapon, its core pulsing with energy. The glow reflected off the dragon's scarred scales, a memory of old wars flashing in his mind. The girl gasped and stepped back, but instead of fleeing, she planted herself in front of the dragon's head, spreading her arms as if her tiny body could shield him from the storm of fire. "Don't you dare!" she shouted. Time slowed for the dragon. He could not move, not fully, but every part of him screamed to protect her. Chains rattled, stone cracked, his muscles burned as he pulled against the bonds. The watchers advanced. The weapon charged. And then, instinct took over. The dragon roared. The sound split the storm, shaking the earth, rattling the ruined towers until stones tumbled from above. The intruders staggered back, clutching their ears. Fire sparked in the dragon's throat, weak but alive, spilling heat into the air. He lurched forward, throwing the weight of his body into the chains. One snapped. A single, thunderous break of iron that echoed like the cry of a dying star. The girl stumbled back as the dragon's wing shifted for the first time in centuries, stretching against the air. He swung his massive body, shielding her behind his bulk. Energy blasts struck his side, burning his scales, but he endured. He opened his jaws and unleashed fire. Not the endless inferno of his youth, but a desperate burst that seared the air, forcing the intruders to scatter. The girl's heart pounded as she watched him fight, his body rising against centuries of weakness. Tears blurred her eyes, but they were not from fear. They were from awe. He was alive. He was fighting, not to destroy, but to protect her. The watchers regrouped, shouting orders. More weapons charged, glowing brighter with deadly promise. The dragon swayed, his fire nearly spent, his body trembling with exhaustion. But the girl did not hesitate. She seized the broken tool, ran to the nearest chain, and struck it again and again with everything she had left. "Break!" she screamed, her voice raw, echoing through the chamber. "Break!" The dragon's roar joined hers, his muscles straining, his fury burning hotter than his wounds. With one final surge, the chain snapped. The sound was like the shattering of the world itself. The intruders froze, their weapons lowering for just a heartbeat. And in that moment, the dragon spread his wing halfway open, broken but defiant, his massive body rising above them all. The girl clung to his side, her eyes blazing with fire as fierce as his. The battle was not over. But the chains had begun to fall. The storm outside raged like a living beast, but inside the ruined fortress a greater fury was rising. The war dragon, half freed from his chains, stood tall for the first time in centuries. His body trembled with weakness, but his eyes burned like molten gold. One wing hung free, torn and stiff, while the other was still bound by rusted iron. Yet even half bound, he was terrifying, an ancient force clawing its way back into the world. The intruders regrouped quickly. Their armor glowed with crimson lines, their weapons humming with lethal power. They were not ordinary soldiers, they were guardians, remnants of the Empire's secret order, sworn to ensure the dragon would never rise again. Their leader raised a gauntlet hand, shouting over the roar of the storm. "Contain him! Kill the girl, if you must." The girl's heart froze, but her feet did not move. She pressed herself against the dragon's side, her small hands gripping his scales as if her touch alone could give him strength. "Don't let them take you," she whispered, voice shaking. The dragon heard her. And something ancient stirred inside him, something that had slumbered beneath centuries of sorrow. His chest expanded, a glow building deep in his throat, faint at first, then growing brighter. Fire. Real fire. The warmth surged through his body, burning away despair, flooding him with strength he thought lost forever. The Guardians charged. Energy bolts streaked across the chamber, searing the stone and filling the air with smoke. The dragon lunged, his claws raking the floor, his roar shaking the mountain itself. He unleashed his breath. Flame exploded from his jaws in a blazing arc, a storm of heat and fury that turned the chamber into a furnace. The intruders staggered, their shields crackling under the assault. Some fell, their armor melting, their screams drowned in fire. The girl shielded her face, tears streaming from the heat, but she did not turn away. She watched the impossible, the forgotten war dragon reborn in fire, not as a weapon of empire, but as a protector fighting for her. Yet his strength was not endless. The centuries weighed on him. His fire sputtered, faltered, then roared again, each breath weaker than the last. The Guardians pressed forward, their weapons cutting through the flames, their formation tightening. Bolts slammed into his body, burning holes into his scarred wings and chest. He staggered, his claws slipping against the stone. Blood, dark and thick, splattered across the floor. The girl screamed. "No! You can't fall." She ran to the remaining chain, still locked tight around his other wing. She struck it again and again with her battered tools, sparks flying. Her hands bled, her arms shook, but she refused to stop. The dragon turned his massive head toward her, his golden eyes glowing brighter through the smoke. The Guardians saw her. Their leader pointed. "Take the girl, she is the key." Two soldiers broke away, rushing toward her. She stumbled back, swinging the useless hammer at them, her heart pounding in terror. The dragon roared, dragging himself forward, his chains groaning as he hurled his bulk between her and the attackers. His claws came down with thunder, crushing one into the stone. The other leapt aside, firing wildly, bolts striking the dragon's side. He endured the pain, his gaze fixed only on the girl behind him. His fire flickered again. With a growl that shook the fortress, he spat another burst of flame, not wide but focused, a narrow beam of searing heat. It struck the chain. The iron glowed red, then white, cracks racing across it. The girl dropped her tool, realizing what he had done. She raised her bleeding hands, bracing the heated metal with her strength, and pulled with every ounce of will she had left. The chain snapped. The sound rang through the chamber like a bell tolling across the ages. The dragon's other wing tore free, unfurling in a storm of dust and broken stone. For the first time in centuries, both wings spread wide, filling the chamber with their vast shadow. The Guardians faltered, their courage wavering as the ancient beast loomed above them, his body battered but alive, his fire reborn. The girl stumbled back, her eyes wide, her face lit by the glow of his scales. The dragon rose higher, shaking the fortress with his movement, his wings stretching toward the storm outside. He opened his jaws and released a roar that shattered windows, toppled broken pillars, and sent the Guardians fleeing in terror. But the battle was not done. The leader stood his ground, raising a weapon unlike the others, a spear forged of black metal, its tip glowing with the same cursed fire that had once bound the dragon. He hurled it. The spear pierced the air, a deadly streak aimed at the girl. The dragon moved. His massive body surged forward, his wings sweeping around her like a shield. The spear struck his side, embedding deep, sending waves of agony through him. He collapsed to one knee, his breath ragged, his fire flickering. The girl screamed his name, her tears falling onto his bloodied scales. But the dragon did not bow. Slowly, painfully, he rose again, his eyes burning with fury greater than any chain. He tore the spear free, flames searing the wound shut. He fixed his gaze on the leader, and with one mighty sweep of his wings, he launched himself across the chamber. The ground shook as his claws came down, his jaws snapping shut around the armored figure. Fire erupted, and when the smoke cleared, nothing of the leader remained but ash. The remaining guardians broke. They fled into the storm, their voices lost in terror, their weapons abandoned. The fortress shook with silence once more, save for the crackle of fading fire and the heavy breathing of the dragon. The girl ran to him, throwing her arms around his scarred muzzle. He lowered his head, his golden eyes softening even through the pain. For centuries, he had fought only for commands, for masters who betrayed him. Now, for the first time, he had fought for something real. Not for war. Not for empire. For her. The storm roared outside, but inside the ruined halls, the dragon's fire was alive again. The storm outside began to fade, but inside the fortress, silence pressed heavy on the broken stone walls. The girl knelt beside the dragon, her small hands stroking his scarred scales, her tears mixing with the soot and blood that clung to him. His golden eyes dimmed with exhaustion, his body trembling as though every movement carried the weight of centuries. He was free, yet broken, alive, yet wounded deeper than flesh could ever show. The last echoes of battle drifted into the distance. The guardians were gone, fleeing like shadows before dawn, but their threat lingered like a curse in the air. Somewhere, the empire that had chained him would learn of this night. They would not forget. They would not forgive. The girl pressed her forehead against the dragon's muzzle. Her voice trembled. "Don't leave me, not now. Not when you're free." The dragon's chest rose with a slow, heavy breath. He was not like men, but she could feel the emotion in him, a storm of gratitude, sorrow, and something he had not felt in centuries, hope. A low rumble came from deep within him, not anger, not pain, but a sound like a sigh. His massive head lowered until his golden eyes were level with hers. And there, in the flicker of his gaze, was his answer. He would not leave. Not while she needed him. The fortress cracked under his shifting weight as he struggled to stand. Each movement was agony. The spear wound burned, the chains had carved into his flesh, and his wings ached like shattered glass. Yet he rose. He spread both wings for the first time in ages, their vast shadow stretching across the ruined chamber, broken but unyielding. Dust and stone rained down, and with one heavy beat, he sent the last remnants of his prison crashing to the ground. The girl shielded her face, her heart thundering at the sight. He was magnificent even in ruin, majestic, terrible, beautiful. Not a beast. Not a weapon. A survivor. But his fire was fading. She saw it in the way his chest rose slower, the way his eyes dimmed, the way blood still seeped from the deep wound where the cursed spear had struck. She pressed her hands against the wound, desperate to help, her tears dripping onto his scales. "Please," she whispered. "Don't give up. You're not alone anymore." The dragon closed his eyes. Her words sank deeper than any chain, deeper than any scar. For the first time in centuries, he believed them. He was not alone. The empire had abandoned him, cursed him, buried him in the dark. But this girl, small, fragile, human, had shattered those chains. She had chosen him when no one else would. A low sound filled the chamber. The dragon was weeping. His tears were not like hers. Thick drops of molten gold fell from his eyes, hissing as they struck the stone, glowing with a strange light. Each tear carried centuries of pain, centuries of betrayal. But in their glow was also release. The girl watched in awe as the golden tears pooled at her feet, their light soft and warm, washing over the wounds like a healing flame. The spear wound glowed, its edges closing. The chain scars faded into faint silver lines across his scales. His breath steadied, his fire rekindling. The girl gasped, her heart soaring. She realized then that his tears were not just sorrow, they were life. The dragon's eyes opened again, brighter, fiercer, alive. He lowered his head, nudging her gently with his massive snout, his breath warm against her. She laughed through her tears, throwing her arms around him. "You're free," she whispered. "Truly free." But freedom was not without cost. From the shattered gates of the fortress, she saw lights flicker in the distance. Dozens, hundreds, maybe more. The Empire had seen the fire, had felt the roar that shook the mountains. Reinforcements were coming. The girl looked up at the dragon, fear pressing into her chest. "They'll come for you again. They'll never stop." The dragon lifted his head toward the storm-torn sky. His wings spread, blotting out the moonlight. He was no longer the broken prisoner she had found in chains. He was fire reborn, a force the Empire could not bury. His roar thundered across the valley, shaking the night, a challenge to every army, every tyrant, every chain that still waited in the dark. Then he lowered his gaze to her, and in his golden eyes she saw not rage, but a promise. He would fight, yes, but never again alone. "Take me with you," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "Wherever you go." The dragon bowed his great head, lowering his body so she could climb onto his back. She hesitated for only a moment before placing her small hands against his scales and pulling herself up. Her heart pounded, her breath shaking, but her spirit blazed. Together, they would face whatever came. The wind howled as he unfurled his wings. Dust and fire swirled around them, the fortress groaning as if mourning its own destruction. With a single powerful leap, he launched into the night sky. The girl clung tight as the world fell away beneath them. The storm parted around his wings, the clouds glowing with streaks of lightning as they rose higher and higher. Her fear melted into awe as she looked out across the endless sky. For the first time, she felt the freedom he had been denied for so long. Below them, the Empire's soldiers poured into the valley, their lights like fireflies against the dark. But they were too late. The dragon was gone, and the girl with him. The night air rushed past, cold and sharp, but in the warmth of his scales she felt safe. She pressed her face against him, whispering words only he could hear. "You're not a weapon. You're not a monster. You're my friend." The dragon's wings carried them beyond the storm, into the open sky where the stars stretched forever. His fire glowed brighter with each beat of his wings, not as a tool of war, but as a beacon against the darkness. And for the first time in his long life, he allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. Together, they vanished into the horizon, leaving behind the ruins, the Empire, and the chains that once bound him. The war dragon was free. And beside him, so was she. And high above the broken world, the forgotten beast cried not in sorrow, but in joy.